Biology is the most complex system we have ever tried to understand. And despite years and decades accumulating knowledge, building databases, we still don't have the equation that would allow us to control and predict in a rational way the outcomes of treatments and diseases. Let me give you an example of why this can be a problem. Because we're working with what I would call this incomplete map of biology, consider drug development. Of all of the drugs that go all the way to human trials, so these are drugs that have cost millions, billions of dollars to get where they are, that have taken years in the development process. Of those drugs, 90% of them will fail. This is, of course, an incredible monetary cost and an opportunity cost. It also costs millions of lives. To address this, medical research has looked at all kinds of solutions and continues to iterate and grow. And one of the ways that has recently been transforming biology, like it's been transforming almost anything today, is artificial intelligence. In medicine, it started out, I'm going to say, slowly. If I talk about AI for diagnostics, if I talk about AI for drug discovery and design, this is no longer surprising. But last year, in 2024, there was a complete paradigm shift. Because last year, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry went to the creation of an artificial intelligence called AlphaFold. And what AlphaFold does is it basically just solves a decades-old problem, which is understanding how proteins will fold, how they go from a string of amino acids, so the sequence of letters that you can see behind me, essentially a one-dimensional object, into a three-dimensional object that is the actual protein that can then interact with other molecules. This is a complete revolution, and it has transformed the way that drug discovery proceeds, for example. But biology is not just the amino acid sequence that's coded by DNA. It's not just the proteins. It's also the cells. It's also the tissue. And it's also the entire human body, including your medical history, including where you live, including how you live. Bioptimus's goal is to build an artificial intelligence, a foundation model that will be holistic, that will see biology at all of its scales simultaneously in such a way that it will understand how the microscopic influences and is influenced by the macroscopic. To do this, at Bioptimus, we have access to the three things that we really need. The first one is, if you want to build an artificial intelligence of this scope, you need access to data. And not just any kind of data. You want access to medical data. Because we're not building a standard machine learning tool that's going to be trained on human language. We're training a model that's going to be built off of DNA sequences, off of spatial proteomics, off of tissues and medical records. We have partnerships across the world with both hospitals and data providers that give us more than enough data, at least for now. The second thing we need, if you have a lot of data and you want to build a machine learning model, you need compute. You need GPUs, you need GPU clusters, and they really don't tend to be cheap. Bioptimus is only 1 year old. As of today, we've raised $76 million that are spent in a very large amount paying for cloud compute to train these massive models of biology. And then last, but definitely not least, if you're going to take all of this compute and you're going to take all of this data and you're going to try and put it together, you need a team. You need people who are going to understand the details of how to speak to GPUs to squeeze out all of the compute you can get. You need biologists that understand the details of histopathology, that understand spatial transcriptomics and the noise that can exist in the data. And you need a team that's going to be able to talk to each other so that you can take the specificities of medical data and use it to build a machine learning model that doesn't work despite the noise and the artifacts, but with them, to include them into the modeling abilities. We have that team. I would argue it's our strongest asset. In a year, we've already released 3 models, including one of them called Bioptimus 0, which has been, at this point, downloaded over 100,000 times. And to me, this is not nothing, because this is not ChatGPT, right? There are not that many people in the world who see an open source histopathology foundation model and are like, great, I'm going to download this over the weekend and see how I can use it. We do already have over 100,000 downloads. And not only has this model been benchmarked and shown to be top of its class in terms of things like cancer prediction, survival analysis, and so on and so forth, or biomarker discovery as well, or biomarker detection, so that you can identify whether or not a treatment will succeed. A lab at Harvard has shown that our model is best in class at predicting which genes are expressed at a cellular level within the cancerous cells that are visible on an H&E slide. We've started to bridge this gap between the macroscopic and the microscopic. But that's step 0. Step 1 is what we're working on this year, what my team back in Paris is working on today, building a foundation model that will be truly multi-scale, that will ingest information about genes, information about cells, and information about tissue, all at the same time. And that would be step 1. But our end goal is something more than that. Our end goal is what people tend to call a digital twin. A digital twin is essentially a virtual clone of yourself, of anybody here in this audience, that people can use, that medical practitioners can use, that researchers can use to understand and simulate how certain interventions and how certain treatments can affect a patient. But I want to be very precise here. It's not any patient. A digital twin is built and is going to include all of the information that you're willing to provide about yourself. And so a digital twin will understand how a treatment will work for you, with your allergies, with your past medical history, with your risk factors. Digital twins, I think, are going to save millions of lives. Biology is not going to remain something that is only built in experimental wet labs. It's of course going to be this, but it is also going to be transformed by in silico experiments, by artificial intelligences that can predict and simulate life holistically, from the small to the large, for every patient. This is what we're building at Bioptimus. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's fascinating. First question, I suppose, off the top. Who's it for?
Very good question. It is, I would say, both for pharmaceutical research labs. That is going to be our main client. That being said, we are also actually putting some of our models available in open source for academic labs as well, because we want our models to actually be used and be able to permeate research as a whole. So we're hoping for this scenario where we build up a user base starting in particular in academia, but then is going to grow and be used no longer for free within commercial settings such as pharma research.
Thank you. How are you proposing to get to market?
So we're using basically software as a service, essentially. So we have licenses for the use of our models. So I talked about Bioptimus 0 today, which is fully open source. We've released Bioptimus 1, which is now licensable. And so you have to pay per use. Either as we build partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, sometimes we decide to have, like a one-time license where we work with them to build bespoke foundation models that are going to be maybe fine-tuned to their data and to their specific use cases. Or, as is this kind of typical use case of foundation models outside of medicine, you pay per token ingested and token output. And we're working with both of those.
Hi, thank you for that. I've got 2 questions, I think probably both quick. First one is around timelines. So obviously love the idea of a digital twin of a human body being able to predict how any drug might work. I mean, sounds amazing. Sounds like it's a long way off. Like,
Yes.
what are the timelines you're thinking of here?
Oh, it's definitely, myself and a lot of my team are from Google DeepMind, and we would have called this a moonshot over there. This is something that's not going to be in the next, like for the next 5 to 10 years. So a lot of what we're building now is tools that are going to take us along the way to the moon, essentially, to that landing. But we want the intermediary milestones, including the multimodal model I discussed briefly in Bioptimus 0 and 1, that will be commercializable along the way.
Okay, thank you. 5 to 10 years, that sounds punchy. You just mentioned DeepMind, actually, which leads to my second question. Is anybody else doing this? Like, this feels like this is almost like a DeepMind size problem, right?
I'd say there are, well, not a lot. There are some startups and companies that do what we would call unimodal foundation models, so models that are focused just on histopathology, models that are focused just on genetics or single cell. There are maybe one other, I don't want to, like, incorrectly say we're the only ones, but it's a very, very small number, and for the reasons that I outlined, you need a lot of funding, and you need a team with an expertise that's still not very commonly accessible, and you need the data partnerships, which means you either actually work with people who will generate the data for you, or you're in a setting which we're fortunate enough to be in where we can leverage partnerships that already exist.